Why did it come to this? Hi, hello, yes, My Hero Academia is rushing towards its finale, and while some cool shit is happening, it's also suffering from ending clairvoyance, a phenomenon wherein once you reach the end of a story and look back, the cracks start to show. This happens to everyone, but MHA seems to be very intent on making it as apparent as possible, with the recent final arc being fairly fast and dirty with a lot of its narrative choices. So let's chat about the most painful one. Mirio Togata was a juggernaut of popularity within and outside the world of MHA, being one of the most memorable characters during the Overhaul arc. A fun design, a super cool ability, and a likable personality went a long way to catapult Mirio into the hearts of many. Fast forward to today and he, much like the series itself, is a shell of his former glory, a stark reminder of the difficulties the series has faced in the last year or so. What happened? We should first establish what made Mirio work in the first place, and through extension also mention Eri. Mirio was essentially an obstacle for Deku, tailor-made to reveal his shortcomings by forcing comparisons. He is born as close to quirkless as you can get, with a terrible ability that is only one backfire away from killing him, and yet he turned it into one of the greatest weapons in the series. Despite adversity, he is ever cheerful and ready to show what he's made of. His imposing physique juxtaposed against his simple, friendly face inspire both admiration and trust, qualities of both a great leader and a great hero. He is, by all intents, meant to be a superior to Deku. But he's also meant to be a warning. Power and charisma are great, but you know who else had both of those? All Might, who nonetheless failed as he overexerted himself while shouldering all of society's burdens on his own. And so, in the same vein, Mirio rushes ahead by himself during the Overhaul raid, attempting to save everyone himself, but only ending up sacrificing his future. This showcases the potential path Deku could walk, where no matter how great he becomes, it is all for nothing if he falls victim to the same unilateralism as All Might. Meanwhile, Eri functions as a symbol of victimhood and recovery. Her power is game-breaking, story-breaking even, and for it, she herself has been broken many times, enduring horrible pain at the hands of her grandfather's zealous ward. Her existence is one of pain, and must therefore be saved and then nurtured back into society. She works well for this as she is instantly likable and pitiable, and emotionally saving her promises a great reward for the story, namely an immense power, Rewind. This, however, can only be achieved if she is recovered on that emotional level, as reliably controlling a quirk is impossible as long as the darkness of her past looms over her. These two characters being introduced together isn't a coincidence. We are supposed to immediately wish for Eri's power to become controllable as an extension of getting our lovable Tauntaun back on track. The series thus forms a twofold promise of sorts. Mirio will get his powers back if Eri is taught to control her quirk by saving her from Overhaul's trauma. Now, this would naturally seem like a long and arduous process. Overcoming trauma is a Herculean task, and any piece of media depicting that has the responsibility to take it slowly and seriously. On a more diegetic level, Mirio's return to form necessitates a certain level of gravitas because of what it would mean to the series. The having and not having of quirks is the central categorical inequality of MHA's world, and meddling with it is and should be a big deal. The first time it's meddled with is when Deku receives One for All, reversing his position in the world, and that is treated with an immense amount of time, detail, and effort. Mirio getting his powers back would be the second time this inequality is trumped, and thus it would need just as much narrative weight and time. So, this situation lays out a fairly clear path forward. Eri and Mirio will, together, as caretaker and child, pop up in the story periodically to parallelly develop this gradual recovery towards Eri restoring Mirio's ability. A few key aspects here is that such a journey would, logically, have to be A, fairly slow in order to both balance at what point Eri's rewind becomes a narrative factor and to honor the difficulty of their respective arcs. B, gradual, as an extension of that slow pace, showing us the little progresses and victories on the way so that it feels earned and rightful, and C, in the background, since it can't take priority over Deku's main plot. And for a while, this seems to work out great. We regularly check in both of them as Eri slowly but surely acclimates to moving on from her days as a test subject. It's clear she still has a long road ahead of her, but progress is being made bit by bit. Anyway, in the war arc, all of this is resolved in a 2-page flashback after Mirio suddenly appears with his quirk having been restored off-screen. This is, with no exaggeration, My Hero Academia's lowest point to date, for a few reasons. 1. I cannot tell you enough how absurdly sudden and abrupt this is. After seeing Eri and Mirio periodically for a while, we last leave them with Eri's horn acting up, which in hindsight is supposed to be foreshadowing. But this doesn't actually foreshadow anything. Her horn being weird could mean any number of things, and while this is later emphasized by her horn being gone when she briefly appears later, this, again, doesn't immediately mean, oh, she must have gained complete control and healed Mirio. This is especially jarring because the last update we got from her ability specifically was that they were going to start training it. We essentially skip from time to get good to wow, we got good, with nothing in between, and that is just not satisfying in any way. This leads into a second issue, which is that this moment is a laughably terrible conclusion to these two character arcs. Eri's story is, up to this point, handled with great care, as we watch her slowly become part of the UA family. That being said, by the time the war rolls around, she does not seem ready and fully developed at all. She's still timid and scared, and it doesn't look like she has overcome the lingering shadow of Chisaki yet. The Culture Festival obviously helped, and the visual of her freeing herself from the shadow over her is a very strong indicator, but still, she doesn't yet look confident enough to attempt anything like restoring Mirio's power. Moreover, we literally never saw or even heard of her making any progress with her ability. No, that is randomly shoved into this flashback for like 2 panels. These 2 panels of Eri torturing lizards is all we get in terms of justification for her ability, and it happens after the damage is already done. This tender story of a child rising up beyond its trauma is rushed so hard that it's almost as impressive as it is disappointing. Mirio doesn't walk away looking much better either. As we mentioned earlier, his return to the front lines would, reasonably, be treated like a big deal, the end point of an arduous journey. But because of how sudden Eri essentially jumps to the end of her arc, Mirio is dragged with her, since their stories are intertwined. And as a result, Mirio arrives at his recovery without his quirkless period having been shown or fleshed out at all. He just pops in for a gag occasionally and then dips again, but for who Mirio Togata is, the period in his life where he was quirkless might as well not exist. So the only substance, the only progress we get on quirkless Mirio is, again, on that 2-page flashback after his return, and frankly, it's to his detriment. Mirio, the man closest to number 1, someone so selfless and kind that he already turned down receiving a quirk once, actually just went up to Eri and asked her to fix him. This is so bizarre because it just doesn't feel right. Mirio asking Eri to do something he knows she's afraid of just because he wants to help out the guys is just very weak and kind of out of character. But it didn't have to be. The scene frames this as Mirio feeling confident after having seen Eri train, which really could have worked. If Mirio's request was an extension of the deep trust and friendship he built with Eri, that would have been great. But we didn't see any of that. His reasoning is based on evidence we haven't seen or heard of before he mentions it, and his motivation isn't founded on anything actually convincing. He just vaguely wants to come along and see if he can help. What, is this the first major hero operation in the time that he's been quirkless? It's just all fairly contrived. On a third note, I could actually forgive all of this. As much as I'm whining about it, if all of this were in service of a great moment and a cool further plot development, I could probably look past it. There are other examples in this series where even when something dumb happens, I'm okay with it because it leads to something cool. For example, I think the way Deku gains all of his new quirks is awful and way too fast, but I cope, because the new moves have made all of his fights a lot cooler. It's essentially balancing the question of, was the sacrifice of narrative coherence worth this moment? And the Mirio moment fucks this up too, because it ruins both Mirio and Eri's character arcs for the sake of Mirio punching a Nomu twice. No, seriously, all Mirio does is pop out dramatically, punch a Nomu, and then he just vanishes. He literally has not appeared since. All the hoops and bullshit this moment went through in order to happen was literally just so Mirio could appear for a grand total of 3 chapters. His existence hasn't even been mentioned since. Both him and Eri have essentially ceased to exist. There is a scene later in the manga where we get to see the other 2 of the big 3 and Mirio isn't there. This turns an already bad moment into a complete embarrassment. All those character moments, the drama, the progress, all the cool narrative beats these 2 characters could have had, they were all sacrificed so that Mirio could be the one to save Genist, which absolutely wasn't the job that required him specifically, and to then vanish, never to be heard of again. And so, fourthly, what kind of picture does this paint? We have looked at separate aspects that make this moment suffer, but if we combine them, what are we left with? What happened here? Basically, we have a moment that, in all of its aspects, seems to have been constructed with a single purpose: to be a hype cliffhanger for a chapter. This purpose was decided seemingly without care for the specific implications of Mirio being the involved character, which had to then be hastily waved away a chapter later. We can even see a tiny piece of evidence for this in Deku. When Mirio returns, Deku's shocked face adorns the cliffhanger page, with his surprised "Lemillion" clearly meant as an audience avatar. He is reacting the way we are supposed to react. But in the following chapter, we see that actually, Deku was literally in the room when Mirio got his quirk back, so him being shocked here makes no sense. So immediately after the flashback, Deku babbles about how he isn't surprised about Mirio's power, but more so that Mirio is here, in the war he specifically requested to attend. This is such a clumsy sequence of information that Deku almost serves as an artifact of the thought process. Mirio needs to be here for a hype moment. Bet, let's have Deku react to it so the audience gets that it's a big deal. Oh shit, we have to justify that. Okay, he got his powers from Eri. Oh no, is that Deku there? Okay, he's surprised for unrelated reasons. It really characterizes this scene as having been constructed extremely carelessly. It's very obviously only meant to be a one-off hype cliffhanger, considering how little comes of it, and as a result, the story trips over itself trying to cover its ass with ridiculous excuses and absolutely pathetic flashback that fixes nothing. But the worst part is that there is no going back. Both Eri and Mirio have now reached the ends of their respective arcs in a mangled and terrible way, and there's no fixing that. It doesn't matter if Mirio appears again in the final arc, the damage is done. Both of their stories had a clear end promise. Mirio would get his powers back, Eri would master Rewind. Both of these have now happened, and with that, their biggest contributions to the narrative and themes are over. And the story seems to understand this, as it cynically wipes their existence off the face of the earth after this moment. It speedruns 2 of the story's most tender and touching subplots to serve an absolutely worthless moment of vapid, undeserved hype, and it drags down the entire story with it. So I guess now we have to ask, why? Why did this happen? It's hard to answer, since behind-the-scenes speculation is always iffy, especially through a language barrier. But my guess is that Horikoshi is just tired. I think we can all agree that the pace of the series has sped up dramatically since the Liberation War. It's not about whether or not you think that is good or not. I think, however, it is objectively observable that things have gotten faster, things happen faster and more frequently, and most events are now not really based on preemptive build-up, but rather rely on exciting moments that are later explained by quick flashbacks or blurbs. Think about how the Liberation War was built up for 150 chapters, whereas the final arc war was built up for 30 chapters. Combine this with Horikoshi's outspoken desire to end the series later this year, and you can tell the man just wants to be done with it, and hopes to go out with a bang by having all of his action figures clash into each other, logic be damned. And I mean, looking at the way Shonen Jump treats its mangaka, can you blame him? Not really, I don't think I can. But that doesn't change the unfortunate reality that when you make a change as big as pacing and information flow to a story this late into the game, there will be collateral damage, there will be sacrifices made. And in this case, Mirio and Eri were two such sacrifices. And that is a damn shame. As always, thank you all for watching, and a big thank you to all our patrons, including Fictionape, Cini, Courage, Iron Camel, Jameson Tate, Ludenther, Paracha, Perro Scocco, Project Iceman, Mr. Meander, and Geo. So, yeah, see you for the next video. Bye bye and take care.